And I say to all of that, the right objective, difficult as it is to achieve in any society, is that there should be zero discrimination against people. And what we have today in the modern West is a new framework of discrimination. We have decided that it is okay to discriminate against white people. It's okay to discriminate. Oh, you laugh. Well, let me give you some statistics. Fantastic, I enjoy that.
Well, before you give us some statistics.
No, let me give some statistics.
You can come back
if you are Jewish or Asian or white, it is much harder for you to get into an American university because all of those groups are widely discriminated against in that society.
That's simply untrue.
That is factually correct.
That is simply untrue.
For the same SAT score, you are much less likely to get in. The BBC has whole realms of jobs that are not available to white people. There are internships that prohibit white people from applying. Now, I don't regard myself as white. I'm a first-generation Russian, Ukrainian, Greek, Jewish immigrant. I hate this stuff, and I hate it because it unfairly privileges people who do not deserve the privilege. What we should be doing is eliminating discrimination, not introducing new types of discrimination.
Because of their disadvantaged background, needed more of my attention. Okay? Because of their disadvantaged background, they didn't have the same tools that other kids did. Now, I gave them more attention, which meant, because it's a zero-sum game, there are a fixed number of hours every day, that attention, extra attention, I didn't give to other kids that were advantaged or coming from the advantage. To call this discrimination, because I didn't make my time available equally to everyone, is to miss out on the fact that in order to bring about meritocracy, in order to bring out the talents of the disadvantaged kids, and of course, disadvantage is highly correlated with gender, with races, with race, with ethnic background. To call this discriminatory in the pursuit of meritocracy is essentially to fly in the face of the facts. The second point I wanted to make...
very briefly, I did not.
Okay, you can come
I did not call that discrimination.
Well,
I was talking about admission. No,
when
I was talking about
in
admissions.
Universities that we
admissions.
are going to take people from a working class,
I was
and therefore
talking about admissions.
Okay,
admissions.
but I needed to make the second point because I think it's a question. It touches upon. It speaks to perhaps the deepest difference between Konstantin and I. We have one commonality. We both grew up in a dictatorship. But a very different kind of dictatorship. He grew up in the Soviet Union. I grew up in a Greek fascist dictatorship under NATO. And I'm saying this because you have a tendency to think in terms of us, the West, versus them. And them being the East, being the uncivilized Chinese, or the homicidal Russians, or the Africans, or who are trying to, to come to our shores. Because of my background, I have a very different tendency. You see, we were, in Greece, when I was growing up, part of the West. We were part of the Council of Europe. We were part of NATO. And yet, the secret police broke down our door and abducted my father, and we lived in terror of a fascist dictatorship. So I know how to not see the world in us versus them. I can see, interestingly, my father, the same father, when the dictatorship fell, instructed me in no uncertain terms that I should study in Britain so that I wouldn't have to face the secret police. So I can relate to the importance and cherish the importance of Western values, while at the same time recognizing the dialectical relationship. It is the terror that the West has unleashed on so many other societies that has created existentialist threats for the United States, for us. So let us, just for a moment, consider the possibility that this us versus them, the West versus the rest, is the root problem which essentially condemns the West to the decline of the values, which may end up with a bang, not a whimper.
The West, a beacon of progress or a legacy of exploitation. This debate confronts the uncomfortable truths about the historical foundations of Western prosperity, challenging viewers to reconcile the ideals of democracy with the realities of colonialism and slavery. Konstantin Kissin-Yanis Varoufakis and Cynthia Miliradris engage in a fiery exchange, dissecting the complex relationship between the West and the rest of the world. The debate delves into the enduring legacies of slavery and colonialism, examining how these historical injustices continue to shape contemporary power dynamics. Varoufakis, in particular, highlights the exploitation of resources in countries like the Democratic Republic of Congo, arguing that Western wealth is built on a foundation of historical and ongoing exploitation. The discussion also explores the complexities of diversity, equity, and inclusion day initiatives in the West. Participants grapple with the challenge of addressing historical inequalities while avoiding new forms of discrimination. The debate raises difficult questions about privilege, representation, and the pursuit of social justice. The rise of BRICS nations and the shifting global power dynamics challenge the traditional Western-centric view of international relations. Participants discuss the implications of a multipolar world, questioning whether the West can maintain its dominance in the face of emerging economic and political powers. This debate invites us to confront uncomfortable truths about history, power, and justice. It challenges us to examine our own assumptions and biases, and to consider the ethical implications of our economic and political choices. Let's dive right into it.
I'm asking for you to paint, and it's a kind of naive idea because, of course, you know, it'll never happen. But let's just, if you could control things, would you want every other nation to become as wealthy as the West? Would you want them to become as democratic as the West? Yanis.
Oh, me?
Why not?
Well, allow me to answer by means of an example, which touches upon something Konstantin said. That, you know, the riffraff out there, outside the West, are dying to come to our shores, and therefore it means that we're civilized and we're better. Well, take the Democratic Republic of Congo. The King of Belgium created a slave colony there for 30 years, then it was taken over by the state of Belgium for 40 years. Then, as they were gaining independence, the CIA murdered their first president. And now today, Glencore, one of our great corporations, is mining all sorts of cobalt derivatives and so on, giving zero to the people of the Republic of Congo. I'd like to live in a West which is not a parasite on people that it then denigrates by saying that you are the riffraff and you want to come to a beautiful garden, and this is why, you know, and therefore our dream is to stop you from coming, which is your dream.
Okay, no, but in a way... But is the ultimate aim, I mean, if you could do it, that yes, you don't have whatever the mining companies doing whatever they do in other nations, but those nations build up. I'm just wondering if the dream is a multipolar world.
Well, very briefly, the dream is to have cooperation, solidarity, and genuine development of everyone that lives on this planet.
And the land of milk and honey, too. We must have that.
So, Konstantin, is that what you would also say?
Well, we only have an hour and 40 minutes, so let me be brief.
The multipolar world, is that something that you should say?
No, the multipolar world is an atrocious idea whose consequences will be exactly the consequences we have when you see a multipolar world within one country. That country is Mexico. Mexico is controlled by a large number of cartels. And when one of them is taken out, what ensues is a chaotic fight for dominance again. And the multipolar world will lead to conflagration, inevitably, because somebody has to be on top. It's unavoidable. And
somebody has to be on top.
Of course. You know, Yanis's point about cooperation is entirely wonderful, but the best way to predict human behavior is to look at human behavior in the past. When is this great age in which everyone just sat together?
So that is a good argument to bring back slavery, because almost every society until 200 years ago had slavery.
May I address what Yanis has said repeatedly, actually? I think it's important to do so. What he said on stage during his presentation is entirely true, which is that many of the riches of Western societies are the product of the resources that were taken from other parts of the world. What I'm afraid this analysis is missing is the fact that during that time, as during the present time, the entire world was competing on that very same model. The only reason that the European powers were able to be as effective as they were is that they had superior technology. And superior technology.
China had far more superior technology, and they were not imperialists.
May I finish? One second. Okay. I will come to you to respond, but let's let Konstantin make the point.
Factually correct.
We've got an hour and 40. Well, we're good.
I think it was only Europe that set out to destroy, to extract.
Right, we've only just started. Konstantin.
It's too. I'm also slightly Greek, so this is a Greek on Greek violence here.
Get to the point, because otherwise...
Well, I'm afraid I'm going to need a little time to get to the point, especially if I'm interrupted. So, every other civilization in human history has practiced slavery in one form or another. Every other civilization, including the Native Americans, who were enslaving each other and anyone they could find, the Middle Eastern Arab slave trade across the Saharan desert was worse and lasted longer than the transatlantic slave trade. And every other great empire in history attempted to practice slavery to the very best of its ability, to do the very thing that Yanis rightly accuses Western powers of doing. Now, the reason the West was more successful at this is it was more technologically advanced and was able to transport people across oceans in a way that at that time no other civilization could. So yes, it is true that the Western history is one of colonialism and enslavement, but that is only because we were better at it than other people. That's the only reason that we are where we are.
So just to go, I will come to you in a minute, but just to go back to the specific question.
Yes.
Yeah. Should we be aiming towards a multipolar world? You would say, look, we're a competitive world. Let's just compete against everyone else.
I would say that the best world is a stable one, and the construction we have had for some time now has been one of the best periods in human history since the end of World War II. Now, why has that been?
For the West?
Well, I would argue for the billions of people around the world who've been lifted out of poverty during the same time, in addition to for the West. Now, is that maintainable? Well, that's, I think, the issue that we're in discussions about. I don't know if that's maintainable, but my argument, the argument I made, and the reason that we're having this debate about slavery, is that I consider Western values, I don't think we should bomb them into the people of Iraq and Afghanistan, as some of our leaders have been attempting to do. But they are the best values, at least for those of us who want to live in the West, and we should maintain them as much as we possibly can. And then other people may wish to buy into that worldview as well.
Okay, Cynthia, where are you on this?
Well, I think it's really important to point out that when you're talking about refugees at least, most refugees are not running towards something, they're running from something. I mean, we've sort of skipping the safety bit. And people want to be at home, right? People want to be home in their culture, in their language, with their family. We know that, and I think nobody wants to get into a rickety boat with their infant and cross and make a risky crossing. They're doing that because they have no choice but to do that. And I think if we want to change that pattern, you have to invest in regions of the world safety, reduction of violence, reduction of gang. I mean, you look at what people are fleeing from, the kidnappings, the executions, the assaults, rapes in Central and South America, what people flee to the southern border, why they're doing that, I think, is also on us, to not pay attention to kind of investing in those regions.
Okay, so with an ultimate aim of a multipolar world.
I mean, I don't see any other alternative than a multipolar world, but I also think that it's important to remember that nations have never been only one thing. They're constantly reimagined. They've always been reimagined, and perhaps they should be. So, in Germany, where I spent many years doing research, you look at the history books, the Huguenots showed up, and everybody, is having a freak out about French, right? Like, there's always been immigration, migration, patterns of change, you just look at the Germanic tribes, the Romans, right? I mean, these things, there've always been flows. So maybe we have to reimagine what it is to be a nation as well.
Okay. Now, Yanis, I know I stopped you, and it wasn't always
that's okay. You did well.
But was there something?
There is too much testosterone on the stage between the two of us.
I don't know. The estrogen is trying to match it.
It's a good thing you put me in the middle.
But was there something that you specifically objected to? I just wanted to give you a chance before I suspect the debate is going to.
Well, yes. I mean, factually, it's completely wrong. It's only the West that has created industrial-scale imperialism. If you look at the Arab lands, if you look at the Chinese had the technology. The Indians had the technology. The Indians had an industrial revolution before Britain, and they did not conquer the rest of the world. They did not do what the British and the Dutch and the French did. So it is, for me, just completely factually wrong, and therefore the conversation is not particularly interesting to say, oh, look, somebody would have transported, once they got the technology, hundreds of millions of Africans to their place in order to create sugar plantations or, cotton plantations. It's not true.
But that's exactly what the Islamic world did. The Islamic world expanded from a tiny part of land to conquer all of southern Europe and all of North Africa.
But this is a fake history of the Islamic world.
Hold on a second. And not only that, to transport more Africans from sub-Saharan Africa into the Arab world than the Western powers collectively
did. Okay, look, we can't settle this now, but allow me to just make one point if I can, because of something else Konstantin said. Look, the crisis of 2008 did deplete per capita incomes across the West, but for the reasons that I put forward. Austerity for everyone, except for the financiers. It had nothing to do with migration. In your talk, you made it sound as if it was immigration that created the problems. No, immigration was utterly irrelevant to the crisis of 2008. It was the bankers that created that, and it was the combination of quantitative easing and austerity, which created some room for people to come in and fill the gaps.
Okay, pause.
May I just very briefly to say, I actually agree with Yanis about, I was not suggesting remotely that the immigration had caused the 2007 financial crash. What I was suggesting is our failure to recover is a product of the fact that our politicians bring in people who work for low wages to pretend GDP is growing when it's not. However, may I just address this point about refugees? First of all, most of the people who are coming on small boats are not coming with their infants. They're mostly young men. Number one. Number two, this idea that most of this immigration is based on the fleeing of war is just factually incorrect. Most people, including when they're asked, say that they're coming to the United States, for example, through the southern border, for a better life. And I would too, right? I would too. But countries need borders.
Okay. I was asking about a multipolar world, partly because I was just trying to think about, like, in a way it's that thing about remove yourself from the close-up and just think what the dream is. But also, in a way, I was slightly surprised that none of you, I don't think, slightly Cynthia with you, saw that the threat to the West, such as it is, comes from external factors. Although I would just challenge, you said the West is not in decline, and then you had an apocalyptic picture in your final 30 seconds. Yes. You blew the world up.
That's exactly what I said. That the idea that the West will go out with a whimper, this is the decline, there's no evidence of that. The Western values are declining, but the power of the West, I made the point that never before has so much power been vested in the hands of so few people in the West. So this is the dialectical opposition. Our values are going down the toilet. Our power and wealth is going through the roof. And that is creating an inexorable path towards not a whimpering out, but towards either environmental catastrophe. You can see, COP28, COP29, we're not even talking about anymore environment. The Green Deal in Europe is gone. It's not funded anymore. Donald Trump comes out and says, drill, baby, drill. So we are heading towards a bang, not a whimpering out.
Okay, so if the question had been, is the West about to go, you would have said yes.
Well, no, about means that will happen tomorrow. It may happen in 20 years. It may happen in 40 years. It may happen in 15 years. But there is, the question in this Holberg debate is about a steady decline. I don't see this in terms of our power and wealth.
I was momentarily reassured as you were presenting your thesis.
Yes.
And actually you end up in one of the most alarming places.
Good.
But like Konstantin and Cynthia, you also put it down to the threats.
Of course. The crisis of 2008 was a crisis of capitalism, of Western capitalism. It wasn't a crisis that was concocted in Russia, in China, in the Islamic world. It was the result of this audacious recycling system, which was a very funny combination of balance and disequilibrium, very precarious, and at some point, because Wall Street was given this exorbitant power, effectively to print private money for the bankers, the whole thing came crashing down, and then our leaders decided to not to do what South Korea did in 1998 or what Sweden and Finland did in 1992, which is to save the banks but not the bankers. They decided to save the bankers by printing so much money that essentially you created huge asset price inflation for the rich and you destroyed the prospects of the many with austerity. That is an internal crisis. It is a crisis which is endogenous, to put it in a quasi-scientific manner.
Okay, I just want to dive into something, though, about this sort of the potential external, and there's quite a number of questions on this. One makes the point, you critique the global financial system, and on this question of the West's decline. Is the decline of the West really a decline of the global North, or is it more a matter of the global South gaining the space to assert alternative economic systems and values? Now, you didn't speak to that. But when you look at what's happening with the BRICS and with China and India, do you see that as, well, if not a threat to the West, a competition for space?
No, absolutely, absolutely. What is happening is this. Look, if you look at the United States economy, which is the only Western economy that really matters, it is now at around 50% of the industrial production of China, in dollar terms, not in PPP terms. So already, manufacturing in the United States has declined precipitously. And the West, the global North, as you put it, is now shrinking in terms of global GDP. So you have the BRICS, you have Brazil, you have Russia, you have India, you have South Africa, you have also Indonesia, Malaysia. They are all absolutely peeved by the fact that even though their share of the global pie is increasing, they're all under the thumb of the Fed, of the Central Bank of the United States, in the sense that there is no payment that can take place around the world. A Malaysian cannot buy something from an Indonesian without this payment going somehow through the Fed. The Fed can stop a payment by an Indonesian to Malaysian. So they have this ambition of creating a parallel payment system, which is what the BRICS pays, and it's actually a very interesting thing. But that's not the same thing as a challenge to the US dollar, because the reason why BRICS is not going anywhere fast, even though it is an interesting experiment, is because China, the Chinese Communist Party leadership, they have not decided yet, to challenge the monopoly, the exorbitant power of the dollar. Why? Because if you're a Chinese capitalist, you make your money because of the exorbitant privilege of the dollar. If you're selling aluminium to California, right, the United States is in a huge trade deficit. The only reason why they can buy aluminium from you is because they pay in the global currency, which is the dollar. So the Chinese Communist Party, Xi Jinping, has not decided yet whether they want to challenge the dominance of the dollar. Because, don't forget, they have $3 to $4 trillion worth of savings. It's like you trying to undermine the bank in which you have your savings. But the way that the United States is persecuting this new Cold War, especially after Biden, with the CHIPS Act, effectively told Beijing you're not going to be allowed to have a technologically advanced country or economy. They are pushing, the West is pushing, the United States is pushing the Chinese leadership to the point when they will turn BRICS into something that is substantial, like, for instance, a Bretton Woods with a one at its heart. But they have not decided that yet, because Chinese capitalists don't want it yet.
So when you look at the G20, you look at Saudi talking about joining the BRICS nations. I mean, I'm assuming people know Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa.
Yes.
You just think, listen, this is all overstated, that the G7 is still...
Of course it is. Look, the Saudis and the Emiratis, they think as follows. They saw that after the war in Ukraine, the Fed and, effectively the Fed, along with the European Central Bank, but it was mainly the Fed, essentially grabbed $400 billion of Russian central bank money. Okay? I'm not judging this, I'm just stating it. And if you are an Emirati, a sheikh, you know you're not the best person in the world. You know that you have an interesting track record. And you think, well, they don't like Putin, they got his money, maybe tomorrow they'll get mine. So if you have 100 billion, right, you put a couple of those billions through the Chinese one-denominated cloud finance system, the digital payment system of the Central Bank of China, you hedge a little bit. Washington sees this as a mortal danger to its hegemony, because it's not its industry and it's not its competitiveness that keep America hegemonic. It is the exorbitant privilege of the dollar. The only thing, and this is the delicious irony, that the only thing that really, the greatest ally of the power of the dollar is the Chinese Communist Party, which has not decided yet to challenge it. They can challenge it, but then they will have to be hegemonic around the BRICS. And the Communist Party of China, unlike the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, does not want to be hegemonic. They just want to sell stuff.
Okay, but we're focusing it, understandably, in terms of China and the US. But when you look at other nations, India, for example, and
they want to buy cheap Russian petrol, gas, oil, paying in rupees.
Okay.
And the BRICS pay system allows them to do that.
But would it be fair to say that there are people in the global south, let's call it the global south, who look towards the West, see the G7, see the UK and France sitting on the Permanent Security Council, and think, this is not working for me?
Of course. Of course.
So do you think the UK and France should give up their seat on the...
Oh, I think it's preposterous that we have the relics of the Second World War representing, the international order. But nevertheless, what international order? We have an international criminal court, effectively trashed whenever one of our own bastards is indicted. But when the other side's bastards are indicted, we suddenly love it. We are such hypocrites.
Okay. Cynthia. In this multipolar world, do you think countries like France and the UK should be giving up their permanent seat to make it more democratic?
Well, I think we should at least reconsider the distribution of seats, distribution of power, especially because I think when you're looking at the kinds of things that security is affected by in terms of the information ecosystem, the scams, the AI technology that's used, the rapidity with which sub-Saharan Africa, for example, has moved to entirely mobile systems of banking and payment, right? We're not there, right, in the West. So we're not even, we need to be keyed into how the rest of the world is engaging and preventing some of the, sextortion scams, for example, that are targeting teenage boys across the West. And leading to, I think, in our country, 36 suicides last year that originate from outside the US in the global south. Those kinds of, we have a different level of security kinds of things that have to address what the roots are and what's going on in those parts of the world as well.
Okay, but would you be better able to do these things, which I know you think are fundamental to society, if you opened the doors more to where the power resides?
I do think so.
Konstantin, you were shaking your head.
I think all this talk about the West giving up its seats on the UN Security Council. I mean, look, there are many...
I didn't say the West. I said the UK and France, which, are like middling, relatively, middling powers, let's say.
I think this is all insane. Utterly insane.
Isn't it logical?
No, it's not logical. I come back to what I said before. The world is a competitive place. It's a battle of civilizations. And... ultimately,
it's a very bleak view of it.
Ultimately, somebody is going to be on top. And the choice is...
Oh my God, this is the bully theory.
Yanis,
ultimately...
I'm going to come back to you. You have got plenty of time.
No, I just wanted to be provocative.
Please, Yanis hasn't had enough talking time. Go ahead.
Please, Konstantin.
Somebody is going to be on top, and it's either going to be us, or it's going to be Russia, or it's going to be China. And if you want Chinese communist values to be the dominant ones in the world, be my guest. If you want Vladimir Putin's values to be the dominant ones in the world, be my guest. But I grew up in a society which had that. My family live both in Russia and Ukraine, which are both suffering the effects of that. And I can tell you now, that would be the worst possible outcome for all of humanity.
But Konstantin, you are arguing a different point.
No, I'm not.
My question was around this idea of what happens to the power at the top, and I'm talking about the perfect example in a way is the UK and France having the right of veto. Now, isn't there a danger that the Security Council loses any credibility because it no longer represents what the real world looks like?
The UK is the 6th largest economy in the world. I don't know what we're talking about. We're a very powerful country in the world, hugely still, despite the decline that we're in, and we should cling on to that for as long as we possibly can, for the reason that I gave you, which is a world in which Western values are the strongest ones, is a much better world than whatever alternative would be conceived of or created if that didn't happen.
Okay, so the representation, and I mean, it's really to illustrate a point of what we've got: US, France and the UK sitting there, China, Russia. Have I missed Canada, possibly? Or, anyway, but that, you think, it's fine, we argue the case, leave it as it is. Yes. I mean, I suppose you could argue what value the UN Security Council has anyway.
Quite.
So, and this is something, the idea of the sort of how the world should be, I'm absolutely fascinated by the fact that none of you really see so much of a great threat. So let's turn to the internal struggles. Konstantin, you talked about our civilization is better, and you made the point again. We're having this debate here in a university, and presumably the very reason for having the discussion is the West in decline, because everybody accepts that they want these values. Why do you fear the threat to that, like an internal threat? How great do you think that threat is?
Well, first of all, to address your question about external, internal threats, I don't see them as in any way separate. It doesn't matter what level of external threats you face. If you are stronger than them internally, you're going to be fine. All of that is ultimately based on whether you are capable, strong enough, confident enough, united enough, etc., to defend yourself against whatever is coming from the outside. It's always, these two things cannot be separated from each other. So the West losing its confidence, losing its ability to articulate its own values with confidence, losing its unitedness, using its identity in many ways, is a threat because it makes us more vulnerable to external challenge. Now, because I've been talking for so long, I've forgotten the second question that you asked.
Well, can I interrupt for just a second?
Of course.
Because I want to push you just a little bit on this confidence with which you assert the preference for a set of values that have never been applied universally internally, right? So is the solution then to, like, this internal disruption around who gets access to those, to liberty, to freedom, to universal, whatever it is, whatever value, I mean, you could name the values, whose free speech is challenged more than others, right? How do you justify, like, do you just paper that over?
I don't paper it over. What I say to that is a phrase that I wish more people used, that we use in Russia, which is everything is understood in comparison. Nobody is saying that the Western world is perfect. There are books and academics' careers and all sorts of accolades that can be achieved by chronicling, as Yanis very articulately did, about the evils of the West and its history. You can do that forever, because every great civilization in history has committed things that we, by our standards today, consider evil, and in fact will be hypocritical in its own time too. But the question is, what is a better set of values? Does one exist? Now, to answer your question about, what are you alluding to, there is a phrase in America that I think answers your question very well: a more perfect union. No one suggests that the United States or the values of Western Europe are perfect. I would not suggest that even to this day all people in America are treated equally, whether that's on sex or race or whatever line. But which country has made more progress? We talk endlessly in the West about racism. Okay, what other great civilizations in the world are better at race relations than we are? Is it Russia? When I was last in Russia, there was a song playing on the metro which was, "They killed a Negro, la 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 la, he can't play basketball anymore." In China, one of the most popular commercials on TV was a Chinese girl who was approached by a black man. She pulls him off and shoves him into a washing machine. She puts the product that is being advertised into the washing machine. And what's the payoff? He comes out Chinese. Where is this great world to which we are comparing ourselves to? You cannot compare our civilization to utopia. You have to compare it to reality. And in reality, we are the best civilization in existence today. And that is why we must maintain our dominance around the world.
And no one seems to be arguing with that. Are we good enough?
No, I don't agree with that at all.
Okay.
Lots of people are arguing
We'll come
with that.
back to that. But are we good enough? I just want to...
We're never going to be good enough. Are you good enough? Are you good? Am I good enough as a human being? Have I worked out the right way to treat my wife or my son so that I could say, I no longer need to improve. I am this perfect person. Okay. Is there any human being in the world who's not a psychopath who can make that claim? No. So why should we expect our civilization to be perfect? We should only expect it to be as perfect as it possibly can be and better than others. That's all that there is. Only comparison and nothing else. And if you're comparing us to the land of milk and honey, you are dangerous.
Okay, but I would agree there's a third thing. It's not just accepting that we're not perfect and that we're better than others, but actually actively working to improve the internal, which I'm not hearing you advocate for.
Well, you haven't asked me about it. I'm very happy to advocate it. We had this discussion, very briefly, we had this discussion over dinner last night about diversity and inclusion and all of these programs which are intended to bring people into the thing. And I say to all of that, the right objective, difficult as it is to achieve in any society, is that there should be zero discrimination. Zero discrimination against people. And what we have today in the modern West is a new framework of discrimination. We have decided that it is okay to discriminate against white people. It's okay to discriminate. Oh, you laugh. Well, let me give you some statistics. Fantastic, I enjoy that.
Well, before you give us some statistics.
No, let me give some statistics.
You can come back
if you are Jewish or Asian or white, it is much harder for you to get into an American university because all of those groups are widely discriminated against in that society.
That's simply untrue.
That is factually correct.
That is simply untrue.
For the same SAT score, you are much less likely to get in. The BBC has whole realms of jobs that are not available to white people. There are internships that prohibit white people from applying. Now, I don't regard myself as white. I'm a first-generation Russian, Ukrainian, Greek, Jewish immigrant. I hate this stuff, and I hate it because it unfairly privileges people who do not deserve the privilege. What we should be doing is eliminating discrimination, not introducing new types of discrimination.
Cynthia.
I think when you're born on first base and everybody else is trying to come up
I was not born on first base.
You already are.
How?
As a man. As a man compared to half of the population. You have advantages that are undeniable.
Really?
They are. And you know, you already are ahead of the curve in applications to things, in the way that resumes are reviewed. And so, you know, and you have a privilege of walking around in the world being perceived as white, even if you don't perceive yourself that way, in terms of how you're treated.
I was literally called a Paki at school.
Okay.
How am I perceived as white?
Well, it depends on where you are in the world.
Right. So in my country, I was name-called and discriminated against for being brown. So I have a privilege. You've decided by looking at me that I have privilege?
We all have privilege on this panel. Everyone does. Everyone carries bits of it, right? I'm just saying, and I'm not saying that there aren't differences in admissions. I mean,
there are.
But those differences are also coming on the heels of widespread, well-acknowledged data. The SAT scores are also biased. That people live in really different racially segregated neighborhoods with different school experiences, where 15% of the kids in Washington, D.C. are unhoused, right, in the public school system.
So why don't we fix that instead of...
Exactly.
Well, I'm fully in favor of that, of course. What we should be doing is giving people an equal opportunity to succeed. What we're now doing is not giving people an opportunity to succeed and then saying, oh, you're black, let's give you a leg up into university. That doesn't work.
It's not a leg up. It's an acknowledgement that there are differences in the experiences of kids who grow up, let's say, in poverty. That from certain school districts, So I think that there's... Yes, so invest the energy there rather than at the other.
Can I just create a little bit of space for Konstantin to set out what the consequences of this mind virus, well, actually the mind virus you applied to people thinking this, but the consequences of the discrimination that you see in place?
Well, it's the end of meritocracy. It's the end of meritocracy.
It never started. Meritocracy never began to end. There's never been meritocracy.
Okay, let me rephrase for the pedants.
Privilege.
Let me rephrase for the pedants.
And
it's the end of the pursuit of meritocracy as the goal. No. I agree with Cynthia. The United States Constitution, as written in its original
Positive discrimination is an attempt to create meritocracy.
A failed attempt, an attempt that promotes people who are not qualified.
But not trying is even more of a failure.
I did not say we should not try. I repeat for the third time.
Can I come in as an
it's difficult to talk when you
minute.
interrupt me every 3 words. I did not say we should not try. I think you heard me say twice now that we should be seeking to eliminate discrimination. Mm-hmm. I think I heard myself say that. So the problem with this agenda is that it ends the pursuit of meritocracy as the singular goal for which we should be striving, and instead reintroduces a new form of discrimination that advantages people not for their talents, not for their drive, not for their passion, but for the fact that they have a certain skin color, a certain set of genitals, or whatever else. It is completely antithetical to the goals of the West.
Right.
Spectacularly
Before you come in, I just want to ask one question so that we can narrow it down. Do you accept that in some environments, because just the nature of people responding to people who look or act like them, you end up with these sort of fairly, and it could be entirely black, it could be entirely white, it could be entirely gay. Do you recognise that there is a need to almost kickstart the process so that you have a more diverse and fair group that's doing the picking? You don't even accept that?
Absolutely not. I don't think
under no circumstances.
I don't think there is any need to kickstart things. What there is a need to do is to make sure that people are not discriminated against because of the colour of their skin or their sex or their sexuality. Okay, that's the need.
And if it's an entirely, let's use the historical example, well, it might be white male group or it could be black women doing the employment, and there is a record that they tend to employ like them. You don't think that some external force shoving them in a different direction should be brought
This is where meritocracy comes in. I am an employer. I run a YouTube channel which employs 10 people. It would never in a million years occur to me to employ somebody because of the color of their skin or their sex, because I know that the only thing that matters is getting the very best person for that job. The very best person. And by the way, just so you know, we hired a woman to run the whole thing and she fired all the other women. So there you go.
Yanis.
I'd like to make a couple of points. One concerns this. Look, as an educator, many a time, in a class, there would be young people who, because of their disadvantaged background, needed more of my attention. Okay? Because of their disadvantaged background, they didn't have the same tools that other kids did. Now, I gave them more attention, which meant, because it's a zero-sum game, there are a fixed number of hours every day, that attention, extra attention, I didn't give to other kids that were advantaged or coming from the advantage group. To call this discrimination, because I didn't make my time available equally to everyone, is to miss out on the fact that in order to bring about meritocracy, in order to bring out the talents of the disadvantaged kids, and of course, disadvantage is highly correlated with gender, with races, with race, with ethnic background. To call this discriminatory in the pursuit of meritocracy is essentially to fly in the face of the facts. The second point I wanted to make...
very briefly, I did not.
Okay, you can come
I did not call that discrimination.
Well,
I was talking about admission. No,
when
I was talking about
in
admissions.
Universities that we are going to take people from a working class,
and therefore... talking about admissions.
Okay,
admissions.
But I needed to make the second point, because I think it's a question... It touches upon... It speaks to perhaps the deepest difference between Konstantin and I. We have one commonality. We both grew up in a dictatorship. But a very different kind of dictatorship. He grew up in the Soviet Union. I grew up in a Greek fascist dictatorship under NATO. And I'm saying this because you have a tendency to think in terms of us, the West, versus them. And them being the East, being the uncivilized Chinese, or the homicidal Russians, or the Africans, or who are trying to, to come to our shores. Because of my background, I have a very different tendency. You see, we were, in Greece, when I was growing up, part of the West. We were part of the Council of Europe. We were part of NATO. And yet, the secret police broke down our door and abducted my father, and we lived in terror of a fascist dictatorship. So I know how to not see the world in us versus them. I can see, interestingly, my father, the same father, when the dictatorship fell, instructed me in no uncertain terms that I should study in Britain so that I wouldn't have to face the secret police. So I can relate to the importance and cherish the importance of Western values, while at the same time recognizing the dialectical relationship. It is the terror that the West has unleashed on so many other societies that has created existentialist threats for the United States, for us. So let us, just for a moment, consider the possibility that this us versus them, the West versus the rest, is the root problem which essentially condemns the West to the decline of the values, which may end up with a bang, not a whimper.
Well, I apologize. Clearly, tonight I'm speaking very unclearly because everything I'm saying is being misheard and misrepresented. I never for one time said that the rest of the world was uncivilized. I never said that the Chinese were uncivilized. The Chinese civilization is one of the most ancient civilizations in human history. The Indian civilization is one of the most ancient civilizations in human history. The idea that I think Russia...
You said that our civilization is better.
It is better.
Don't mince your words now.
I am not mixing my words now. I'm
Hold on a second.
explaining to you exactly what I meant.
Our civilization is better.
No, it's not.
Well, quite. So...
It really is not. The Arab civilization saved us from the Middle Ages through the translation process. We wouldn't have the ancient Greeks. We wouldn't have the Renaissance without the Arab civilization.
But did I ever say...
the Jews lived far better lives in the Ottoman Empire than they did in the West.
We're talking 2024. Where would you choose to be born today?
In the southern suburbs of Athens, where I come from, because I'm a patriot.
Yeah, I would still be in the United States.
There you go.
Somewhere in the West, I haven't picked where yet. I'm waiting to see which part of it declines faster. But the point I'm trying to make is when I talk about our civilization being better, it's a comparative analysis, not chauvinism. I come from a different society. I don't see Russians as others. I see myself as Russian, and my values to some extent are still from that place, and I borrow from that, and I borrow also from my Western heritage by virtue of my growing up and being educated here. The point I'm trying to make is we have to compare to others. And I say to you, I would much rather live in a world where the West is dominant than the alternative. Now, what is the alternative? Many people who will tell you, well, the West is hypocritical. Yes, it is. The West has an evil history. Yes, it has. They will then not articulate what it is that they're looking forward to. And my argument is the multipolar world, which is being so prominently advertised to you as the end of our hypocrisy and the end of our evilness and the solution to all the terrible things that we have done, is an unstable structure which will result in the dominance of a different civilization, which will impose its values on the world. And the question that we should all be asking ourselves is, do we want that? Or do we want the West to continue to be the dominant force in the world? That is the choice. And anyone who tells you otherwise is either misleading you unintentionally or doing so deliberately.
This debate transcends a mere exchange of opposing viewpoints. It's a raw and visceral exploration of the Western psyche, exposed and vulnerable against the backdrop of a rapidly shifting global order. The participants, Konstantin Kisin, Yanis Varoufakis, and Cynthia Miloradis, are not merely articulating political positions. They are dissecting the historical and contemporary realities of a civilization at a critical juncture, grappling with its past, present, and uncertain future. This public confrontation with the West's internal contradictions is a crucial step towards understanding its evolving role in the 21st century. Yanis Varoufakis, in particular, forces a confrontation with the often uncomfortable truth of Western economic dominance, challenging the self-congratulatory narratives that often dominate Western discourse. His focus on the systemic exploitation in regions like the Democratic Republic of Congo, highlighting the extraction of resources at a devastating human cost, is not a mere historical anecdote. It serves as a stark illustration of the structural inequalities that have underpinned Western prosperity, forcing a re-evaluation of the notion of pure meritocracy and a recognition of the enduring legacy of colonialism. This challenge to the West's self-image is essential for any meaningful dialogue about global equity. Konstantin Kisin, conversely, articulates a palpable anxiety about the shifting global order, reflecting a deep-seated fear of losing the privileged position the West has long occupied. His concerns about a chaotic multipolar world and the perceived erosion of Western influence reveal a profound unease about the future. This anxiety is not merely political or economic, but also cultural and existential, reflecting a sense of disorientation in a world where the West's dominance is no longer assured. It speaks to a broader cultural anxiety about the loss of a familiar world order, where the West was the undisputed center of power. Cynthia Miller-Adris, by focusing on the internal dynamics of Western societies, adds a crucial layer of complexity to the debate. Her contributions highlight the internal contradictions and divisions that undermine the West's ability to present a unified front on the global stage. By addressing issues of race and identity, she reveals the fault lines within Western societies, exposing the challenges of reconciling ideals of equality with the realities of systemic discrimination. This internal fragmentation weakens the West's ability to exert influence and navigate the complexities of a multipolar world. The debate's focus on the refugee crisis serves as a stark and sobering reminder of the human cost of abstract geopolitical discussions. It underscores the interconnectedness of global issues, forcing participants to confront the tangible consequences of their political and economic pronouncements. The desperate flight of individuals from violence and persecution, often driven by circumstances rooted in the very power dynamics being debated, demands a shift from rhetorical posturing to a more humane and responsible approach to international relations. The challenge to Western exceptionalism is a recurring and pivotal theme, demanding a critical reassessment of traditional historical narratives. The assertion that only the West engaged in large-scale imperialism forces a move away from self-congratulatory accounts of Western progress and towards a more nuanced and honest understanding of history. This requires acknowledging the darker aspects of Western expansion and its lasting consequences, including the enduring legacies of colonialism and systemic exploitation. The 2008 financial crisis, as referenced in the summary, serves as a stark illustration of the vulnerabilities of Western capitalism, exposing the cracks in the foundation of Western economic dominance. This crisis accelerated the shift towards a multipolar world, demonstrating that the West is not immune to economic instability and that its economic model is not universally applicable. It also highlighted the growing influence of emerging economies and the limitations of traditional Western economic policies. The rise of BRICS nations and their challenge to the dollar-dominated system signals a fundamental shift in global power dynamics. It underscores the growing desire for alternative economic models and a more equitable distribution of global influence. This challenge to the Western-dominated financial system reflects a broader trend towards multipolarity, where economic power is increasingly dispersed among multiple actors. The debate's exploration of China's role in the global order challenges traditional Cold War-era assumptions, demanding a re-evaluation of geopolitical strategies. The assertion that China's approach, focused on trade rather than hegemony, differs from the Soviet Union's, prompts a reassessment of traditional geopolitical strategies and a move away from simplistic binary oppositions. The discussion about internal cohesion highlights the importance of shared values and a unified identity for the West in a rapidly changing world. The decline in confidence and the difficulty in articulating Western values weakens its ability to respond to external challenges, underscoring the need for a renewed sense of purpose and a clear understanding of what the West stands for. The complex discussions surrounding race relations reveal a fundamental struggle to reconcile ideals of equality with the realities of systemic discrimination, challenging the notion that the West has fully overcome its past. It demands a more honest and nuanced understanding of present-day inequalities and the systemic factors that perpetuate them, highlighting the ongoing struggle for racial justice within Western societies. The differing views on meritocracy and affirmative action highlight the inherent tensions in trying to create a fair and equitable society, exposing the complexities of balancing individual achievement with the need to address historical disadvantages. It reveals the contradictory desires of Western society and highlights the limitations of the current systems in place. The debate's focus on the subjective nature of privilege underscores the complexities of identity politics, highlighting the need for a more nuanced understanding of how historical and social factors shape individual experiences. It challenges simplistic notions of privilege and demands a deeper exploration of the ways in which power and inequality are embedded in social structures. The exploration of Western hypocrisy in international organizations reveals a growing demand for a more equitable distribution of global power, challenging the West to live up to its own stated ideals. It underscores the need for greater transparency and accountability in international governance, moving away from a Western-centric model towards a more inclusive and representative system. The debate's emphasis on the need for the West to recognize its complex relationship with other civilizations underscores the importance of historical awareness and cultural sensitivity. It calls for a move away from Eurocentric perspectives and towards a more inclusive and global understanding of history. The assertion that civilizations like the Chinese and Arab have played vital roles in preserving and advancing human knowledge challenges the Eurocentric view of history, demanding a more balanced and accurate portrayal of global intellectual contributions. The debate ultimately serves as a call for the West to engage in a process of profound self-examination, to redefine its role in a rapidly changing world. It requires a move away from simplistic narratives and towards a more honest and nuanced understanding of history, power, and justice. It is a plea for a more equitable and just global order, where the West acknowledges its historical responsibilities and works towards a more inclusive and sustainable future. The participants, Kissin, Varoufakis, and Miloradris, are not just debating, they are participating in a crucial dialogue about the future of Western civilization, a dialogue that is essential for navigating the complexities of a multipolar world. This dialogue, while often contentious and uncomfortable, is essential for building a more just and equitable global order, where the West plays a constructive and responsible role in shaping the future.